I offer this podcast freely. Your support really makes a difference. To make a donation, visit reneemckenna.com. Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name is Renee Lavallee McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about freedom. And freedom is something that's been very important to me in my life. And my perspective on it and what freedom actually is has changed greatly over the years. So when I was younger, I wanted freedom from authority. Never liked people telling me what to do. I still don't, actually. When I was around 12 or 13, my father took up competitive handgun shooting. He was in law enforcement, a special agent for the Treasury Department, and carrying a gun was part of his job. So I grew up with guns around the house. I shot a gun the first time when I was 4 years old. We were in my garage. It was a little handheld .22, which is a very small bullet. And my father stacked a whole bunch of wood against the wall. I mean, a lot of wood, like about 5 feet thick. Plywood and 2x4s, random scraps. And he showed me how to shoot the gun, how to hold it safely with my arms stretched out and held tight. Not that a .22 had much recoil. And squeeze the trigger. And I shot the bullet and it went all the way through the wood. And he taught me about gun safety. And I know that guns are a very controversial subject, but my father eventually became a gun dealer. I grew up with guns all over the house, have been shooting all my life, and still actually enjoy target shooting when I have the chance. My father was a national and international handgun champion. We never hunted, although I'll be honest, it is something that feels like a survival skill that I actually would like to learn how to do. I actually am a meat eater, although I may outgrow that at some time. And although I try not to participate in corporate farming, the idea of killing and eating plants and animals seems like a natural part of the life-death-life cycle here on planet Earth. So when my parents started competitive handgun shooting, they started to travel on weekends, which was so great as a teenager because a couple times a month I could do whatever I wanted on weekends. I was pretty heavy into drugs and alcohol already at that point, by 13 or 14. And in fact, early when my parents started going away, I told one of my friends that my parents were gone. He somehow mentioned it to his brother, or maybe I talked about it in front of his older brother. And his brother robbed my house while my parents were gone. Stole a bunch of camera equipment and some expensive telescopes that my father used for spotting as part of his handgun shooting. A lot of competitive shooters will have a spotter that tells them how accurate they're being so they can adjust the sights on their gun or their aim and be more accurate. So that was an early lesson in that many people are not trustworthy, even if they pretend they're your friends. But I loved that freedom to do whatever I wanted. Stay out all night. I was a wild child. We'd hitchhike, find guys to party with, find people to buy booze for us. In fact, sometimes we'd just hitchhike up and down the same street until we could find a buyer. So freedom in that early part of my life meant no responsibility. Being able to party as much as I wanted, not come home. As I got older and moved into bar rooms, it meant being able to have sex with whoever I wanted. Or whoever wanted to have sex with me, which was what it turned into a lot of times because I was too fucked up to be making good choices for myself. And I saw freedom as being a free spirit, no responsibilities. I thought true freedom would be having no job, no school, no parents, no authority to tell me what to do, no rules to follow, and enough money to just do whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. And although my father was a very responsible, hardworking man, worked the same job for 30-plus years and retired from the U.S. government, and probably the last 15 of those years he hated his job, and he always fantasized about financial freedom, being able to have money without having to work for it, and to have enough to do whatever he wanted without any responsibility. And it's a funny thing about law enforcement. Many of them have a funny relationship with crime. It's almost like two sides of the same coin. My father always fantasized about being a bank robber. And even though he was a very rule-following person in his own life, for the most part, he loved movies where the criminal was the protagonist and was able to get away with the goods. And it's interesting to consider if I lived out some of my father's unlived shadow as I became a petty criminal. And I don't remember my father being terribly upset when I got arrested or when I got caught for shoplifting. I just remember him helping me get out of it, which I did. I had a lot of get out of jail free cards. I think I used all those babies up by the time I got clean and sober when I was in my early 20s. Because I discovered an interesting thing about freedom is that what happens to most people when there's no boundaries, no structure, no goals, no rules, we tend to devolve, become selfish, purposeless, and spend our time doing ultimately unfulfilling things, trying to fill some void that we don't quite understand. And so I've deeply explored the base freedom of being able to do whatever I want, whenever I want, with whoever I want. And rather than making me happy, it actually turned me into a loser. And I've actually come to experience that structure, work, challenge, make us stronger, actually make us feel good, that we're in a universal system that's evolving and that we need to grow and evolve ourselves, and that making progress is what actually makes us happy in any area of our life. And there's an illusion that having no responsibilities, having complete freedom to do whatever we want is happiness. For most people, it leads to weakness, degradation, and depression. I have a friend who took 6 months off of work. She was feeling really burnt out. She wanted some time to herself, and she had all these ideas of how enjoyable that time would be to not have to go to work every day. And it actually was a really good reset for her to do it. I always think it's a great idea to stir up the pot in our life, particularly if we feel stuck in some kind of patterns that don't feel good to us, whether at work or relationships, how we care for our body, addictions. Getting caught in unconscious patterns is never helpful. But she found that not having structure, not having a reason to get up in the morning, although at first it was nice, she got a lot more rest because she was definitely overworking. But then days and weeks and months started to go by, and she found herself just spending too much time on her phone. She didn't exercise as much as she had hoped, or get all that organizing that she had wanted to do around the house done. And so her fantasies about freedom and free time did not match up with her experience. However, as is often the case when we get out of our daily patterned unconscious routines, there was a much larger shift that happened, probably much more beneficial than getting her garage in order. When she returned to this job that she'd been at for quite a long time, and also felt really underappreciated, and actually kind of bored with the level of work that she'd been doing, she found it even more unpalatable than it was before she took the time off. And so she had a couple of really powerful, honest conversations with human resources and with her bosses. And ultimately, they moved her into a project management position that just happened to open up about a month after she returned. And she had the opportunity to take on more responsibility and expand her skill set, and feel stimulated and challenged and appreciated in a way that she had not before. And she had kind of been fantasizing about the freedom of quitting her job and not working at all. And her time of having no responsibilities and nothing to do really showed her how much feeling productive and learning and growing and challenging herself actually felt much better than this perceived freedom of having nothing on her calendar to do, which actually, over the long run, didn't feel very good for her. She even felt like she was maybe getting a little depressed. And depression, from my perspective, is the pressing down of the authentic self. And when she returned into the structure of work, there was actually an emergence and a support and nourishment of parts of herself that felt exciting and stimulating, and even anxiety-producing because they were pushing her outside of her comfort zone, but it was in really positive ways. I've been reading Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. Peterson is quite a controversial character. I happen to love him and think he's doing amazing work. He's ridiculously brilliant. And rule number 2 is treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. And he talks about order and chaos. And I find great value in looking at the duality or the binary pairs that exist throughout our reality here. And I would say order and chaos is very similar to freedom and responsibility. And both are necessary for healthy functioning. And there's a lot of really healthy discussion and exploration with relationship structures these days. Lots of people in open relationships, being ethically non-monogamous or polyamorous. I'll probably do a podcast about that because it's a big topic. And there's a big difference between being in a consensually open relationship where there's agreements, consciousness, conversation, and structures around that, which is quite different from cheating or sneaking around having affairs. And I've been working with a couple that decided to open their relationship about 6 months ago. It's a male-female couple, and the guy really felt like he wanted to explore his sexuality, particularly his bisexuality with men. And the whole thing made his partner super anxious, but she loves him and wants to make room for him to explore himself. And they have excellent communication and actually a lot of very mature and genuine love and support for each other. And so they tried a lot of different formats of openness, don't ask, don't tell, full disclosure. And ultimately they settled on taking a period of no contact so that she could just focus on herself and not be angsty about where he was at any given time. And he could go out and do what he wanted, and then they could come back together and talk about it after. And he got it on a couple of different dating apps, started text strings with a couple different people. And about halfway through their agreed upon month apart, he said, it's a funny thing. I always love the idea of being open, and I have FOMO of missing out on the other beautiful bodies in the world. But when I really have this opportunity to be sexually free, I realize I actually don't want to be with anyone else. I like to have the option. If I don't have the option, I feel constricted with the idea of only having sex with one person forever, whatever forever is. But when I have the opportunity in this open way, none of these people on these apps are actually as interesting or attractive to me as my fantasies, and not as interesting or attractive as my current partner. And it's really having him look deeper at his relationship with fantasy and how that can be a distraction from some of the things that are actually more important in his life. And they've decided to keep the relationship technically open and continue the conversation. And that's really working for both of them. And what happened for the woman in the couple through that process was she realized that she was really rooting her security in this other person. And she wants to outgrow doing that. And so she spent more time meditating and trying to ground herself in source. She had a pretty fucked up childhood, and so she has what's known as insecure attachment. She's always waiting for the other shoe to drop. She's already been married and divorced before, so she knows that everything's impermanent ultimately. And so although on a deep level, she was really hoping for finding security through more structure, but the openness, the freedom that they agreed upon actually was a catalyst for a lot of growth in her and a deeper security within herself than she had felt before, recognizing that she needed to be less dependent on him or other people, and growing in her own resources and skills to trust the larger flow of life. And so lots of us are looking for external freedom from the stressors and responsibilities of our life. But I think on a deeper level, what we really yearn for is inner freedom. Freedom from fear and freedom to feel fulfilled. And I know for me, I aspired to be free from fear, to be fearless. I don't think I'll get there. Because like my client, I too suffer from insecure attachment, which lends itself to this generalized existential angst that I often have. And I grew up in New England, and in New Hampshire, the state motto is live free or die. And I mentioned my father as a competitive handgun shooter and gun dealer. There was a lot of talk about the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms, the freedom to be able to carry a gun, which is actually rooted in fear. Fear of being harmed, robbed, or attacked. And not that those things don't happen in life, but for me, as I have and continue to resolve underlying emotional issues and outgrow fear, I find I have less and less things to be afraid of, which gives me more and more freedom, inner freedom. And so for me, the ultimate freedom is the freedom to be my most authentic self in the world, to pursue things that bring me joy, that I feel passionate about, and to challenge myself and others to grow, expand, and evolve. Be creative, stimulated, challenged, participating in the life force as it flows through us and we flow with it. But freedom without structure is chaos, and structure without freedom is constriction. And so if you feel stuck or depressed or anxious, I encourage you to look at the balance of freedom and structure, of chaos and order in your life. Optimally, they work together like a healthy coupleship supporting each other for the greater good. But often if there's freedom without structure, nothing productive or constructive is actually happening, and there can even be a devolution. And if there's too much order or structure without creativity, authenticity, and life energy, then there's a choking or a hopelessness or a suffocation that happens. And so perhaps you can look at where you're being called to grow, to make more space for openness, possibility, creativity, or where do you need more structure, clearer intentions or goals, or helpful routines or habits in your life. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like some help with your own self-discovery process, shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. We can talk about how a block of spiritual psychology work might be helpful for you. I have a gathering cohort of really amazing people coming together for the next session of my year-long mentorship program, which starts in September. Schedule and full details about that's on my website, or you can, again, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about prerequisites and how that program works. I have a range of workshops coming up on Insight Timer this Thursday, May 18th, 5 p.m. Eastern, Connecting with Source, a really grounding and empowering guided visualization. And it looks like I might be starting an online book club with the classic Woman Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. So be sure to reach out if that has interest to you. Amazing work with the wild woman archetype that exists within all of us. Blessings on your path. Until we meet again, this is Renee Lavallee McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.